For Sunday, July 22nd, you've found the Georgia gang. Topping our agenda today, Brian Kemp surges into the lead in the governor's race. The Atlanta police problems run deep, and Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms likes her limos. Some of the stories up for grabs on the Georgia gang.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia gang starts now.
We're glad you could be with us on this news-laden Sunday. We are just a few days away, of course, from the runoff primaries in Georgia. Most of the attention paid on the Republican side, with only one statewide runoff for the Democrats. We'll begin on that Republican side. And out of nowhere in the last 2 weeks, Brian Kemp, the Secretary of State, has surged into a lead in 3 different polls over the Lieutenant Governor, Casey Cagle. I didn't see that coming. Phil, what are the numbers?
Well, I tell you what, we had our Fox 5 Opinion Savvy poll that was released on Thursday morning, and these were some really big, surprising numbers that favored Brian Kemp over Casey Cagle in the GOP gubernatorial runoff. It was a sample of likely GOP voters. 55% going for Kemp, 37% for Cagle, which is quite a drop, obviously, and then 8% undecided.
Theron, what do you think caused this roll away from, I mean, Casey Cagle in many ways, sitting lieutenant governor, 12 years, was kind of a given. And of course, he almost broke 40% in the first primary. What has caused this sudden flip? Surge by Kemp, decline by Cagle.
Well, historically, you know, Republicans always have a funny primary in this state. You know, there was a time where people thought that John Oxendine was going to be the nominee for governor, and then Nathan Deal went on to be the Republican nominee. I mean, but the obvious dig is definitely when you get a tweet or an endorsement from a sitting president, whether he or she is popular or unpopular, that definitely boosts your numbers. And so I think it was a confluence of Kemp building momentum, continuing to embrace sort of the tone of his campaign around undocumented immigrants, stuff that he wants to do to change.
Well, no, they're documented. They're just illegal. We can count them.
And it's fake documentation.
But then I think to do it within days of a very popular governor endorsement, which we kind of alluded to on our last show, that we thought that Governor Deal was going to somehow endorse. But to get the endorsement of a president who has got a 90% approval rating amongst Republicans, I think that definitely helped him.
Kathy Willard, glad you're with us. You've been on the ballot many times. So let's review the week for Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle. Monday, rides high, endorsed by Nathan Deal. Rides high for 48 hours. Then, in the space of just about 24 hours, Donald Trump endorses his opponent, Brian Kemp. Another poll comes out showing him trailing, and this time badly. And then finally he learns that on Saturday, Mike Pence was going to be in the state in Macon to rally for him. Casey Cagle never knew what hit him in those last few days of the week, huh?
Right, but what's interesting is you, Phil, talk about the numbers. You know, you got 40% in the primary, and if you look back, you'll see that I've said all along I thought Kemp was going to win this, because usually the second place finisher takes it, because the people who didn't vote for the first place finisher rally around the other person. And I think that's what you're seeing. I mean, you're not really seeing Cagle go up or go down. He's dropped a little bit. That might be within the margin of error, but
you're
Kemp
right.
has
We should
surged.
point out that Hunter Hill endorsed him. Hunter Hill got 12% of the vote in the primary, and he's endorsed Brian Kemp. Clay Tippins, of course, has endorsed Brian Kemp for what's that's worth of his 6% of dishonesty.
Yep.
And then you've got just the general thing, I think, of Donald Trump being wildly popular outside Metro Atlanta.
Well, and just to put it all in perspective, too, I would estimate, along with other pundits, that we'll probably get about 400,000 people voting in this very low turnout July 24th runoff. And that was, put that in frame of reference, there were 600,000 that voted back in May in the first primary. So these are your, and I think Theron framed it fairly well, these are your hardcore, older Republican activists that are pro-Trump, if you look at polling on who's going to be voting in the Republican primary. So, and you mentioned Clay Tippins, Dick. Of course, he had that secret recording, very controversial, of Casey Cagle, and I think that started the slide probably 3-4 weeks ago.
Yeah. Well, I think that tape had more of an impact than I judged at the time. I looked at it simply as an act of treachery, perfidy, and dishonesty by a losing, crummy candidate.
Yeah, but it was news. It was news.
Yeah.
It was news, and also it managed to alienate key voters that are public school advocates as well as private school advocates.
But But if I can jump in here, I think one thing, let's not count Casey Cagle completely out, because one thing that he has at his disposal is money. And don't get me wrong, Kemp definitely has the momentum. If the election was today, I think that Kemp would win the election. But the Cagle campaign has got to figure out a way to really use this money wisely. To really turn out their core voters. And then I said this on the show last week too, we can't brush this over. I think that one of the Perdue's, whether it was former Governor Perdue or current Senator Perdue, had a lot to do with President Trump getting involved, or maybe both. And we always speculated whether or not they were going to involve themselves in this election.
Well, Sonny Perdue, when he was governor, appointed Brian Kemp to be Secretary of State.
Right.
So there is a tie there. But I think you're talking about the use of the money by the Cagle campaign. As we taped this past week, I saw a dreadful Cagle commercial attacking Brian Kemp and accusing him of being a killer. It has something to do with state regulation of nurses. The commercial went by very quickly. I only saw it the one time, but I would say in a season of very nasty ads, this was the most nasty. So if that's Cagle's approach, I'm not sure that's a winning one.
I don't think he can do anything with all that money in 4 days. It's done.
Right.
Now, you know, a little bit of work, maybe he can boost it to get some extra people out, but it's not going to be enough to make up. If your poll's right, you got 37%, probably 4% margin of error. Kemp is well comfortably into the lead. I always say if it's a 5-point spread, you might get there. Anything outside of that, I don't see it.
Well, also, just very quickly, going back to Theron's point, is how did this endorsement come about by President Trump? I think one of the factors was that Governor Deal, and I have a lot of respect for the governor, but Governor Deal had said for weeks that he was going to remain neutral in the primary. And I think the fact that that surprised a lot of people and he didn't, I think that triggered folks in the White House advising the president, say, wait a minute, can you help our guy Kemp?
Yeah, well, I think that the bottom line is this, is that we can't really count this governor out either. I mean, I disagree a little bit with Kathy. I think in 4 or 5 days, we've seen in local elections and in statewide elections, a lot can happen. And so I think that if Governor Deal is going to double down, triple down on his endorsement with Cagle and get around his state and can really make a sensible argument for Cagle, he has a chance. But I think if that doesn't happen, Kemp definitely has run a masterful campaign. I mean, just starting back, the ad, taking the guts and taking the risk of really putting out a very polarizing ad to get him into the runoff, and has really maintained a great deal of momentum going into election.
You know what I think it is in the end between the two of them, if you watch particularly on television? Kemp has at first seemed almost like a comic figure. Then you realize that he was making fun of himself in a way, self-effacing. And now he comes across as a very real candidate, a sort of a real Georgian. And Casey Cagle's positioning it just isn't there in the same way it is real with Kemp.
Kemp has an 18-point lead in Phil's poll with 4 days to go.
Yeah.
You know, 2 days to go.
And that's, yeah, it's tough. And I'm not sure, I don't know, usually negative advertising right up until Election Day is not a great strategy. Now, maybe it'll work.
But one thing about runoff voters, and I know a lot about runoffs, is that you really can't poll enthusiasm, right? And I just believe that, yes, Kemp has the momentum. I think that his people who are the diehards of the diehards have either gone out and voted for him, and they're going to have a reason to go out and vote for him with Trump. But I just think that when Casey Cagle gets 40+% of the vote, he still has a core constituency out there that have either voted for him, that are going to vote. So it's all going to be about Election Day turnout.
It's true. We all agree on that. Yeah.
All right, so let's regroup here because we've still got the lieutenant governor's race to talk about, and we'll do that when we return.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Visit their website at fox5atlanta.com.
We joked last week that if you watch enough television in these last 2 weeks, you'd think the state is peopled by felons, miscreants, now killers. One of the areas where that sort of thing's going on is the Republican race for the nomination to be lieutenant governor. Longtime Senate Majority Leader David Schaefer has got his hands full with a relative newcomer, Jeff Duncan, who didn't vote until 2012 and has served two terms in the General Assembly. Theron, they don't like each other, but we think David Schaefer retains a slight lead around the state. What do you think?
Well, we don't have any polling numbers, I think, to really back that up. But listen, Duncan has run a very aggressive race against a very well-respected and well-known state senator who's had his controversy at the state capitol. I mean, we can't brush that over. He's had some ethics challenges with a complaint that was filed. But also, one of the things that
he was exonerated.
Yeah, but one of the things I found out this week is that we really criticized Duncan on the show a couple times about all this outside spending, but it was brought to my attention, and this is public knowledge, that Schaefer moved $1 million from his campaign over to a PAC that is being run.
I was going to add that.
Yeah, and so I just want to be fair here. Again, I'm not pro Duncan or pro Schaefer in this particular instance, but we criticize Duncan pretty aggressively for having this outside PAC money. But if David Schaefer has upwards to $1.3 million in a PAC that is out here sort of being used in his campaign, and you don't have to disclose the donors, I think that is something that a lot of Republican voters are looking into, because he's able to communicate with a lot more voters than Duncan, who I think had roughly about 600,000 in a PAC that was helping him.
Phil, I'm afraid that the tagline "Shameful David Schaefer" has stuck. That's from the PAC that Duncan is not allowed to coordinate with, as they say.
Right. Well, negative advertising does work, whether you like it or not. I will say this, though. I think that I don't have a problem with PACs, and a lot of folks don't. I have a problem with how negative and how slanderous some of the PAC advertisements are, and that's the problem, in my opinion, with Jeff Duncan's campaign. He's better than that, I thought, but some of this is just outright misinformation and lies.
Some of my GOP sources tell me, Phil, and I know you talked to some of these folks, is that yes, there has been some negative attacks, but when you have $1.3 million in a PAC, and we didn't disclose this last time, so let's be fair, and some of this money is being negatively put out about Duncan. Now, we don't see it on television, but I'm hearing this through mail pieces, I'm hearing it through Facebook advertisement, geo-targeting. I mean, Kathy and I know that this stuff really kind of worked in the local elections, and so I think the criticism is on both sides of these Republican candidates.
Last night on Fox News, excuse me, Thursday night on Fox News, there was a run of commercials. It was funny because cable doesn't have the same regulations on commercial placement as television does, and I was sort of dazzled. Anti-Duncan, pro-Duncan, anti-Schaefer, pro-Schaefer,
yeah.
Anti-K. It was amazing. You wanted to take a shower before you went to bed if you watch this. Now, Kathy, I'm going to put you on the spot. There's one statewide runoff among the Democrats. Secretary of Education, Superintendent of Schools. Are you prepared to opine on the breathtaking race between Sid Chapman and Otha Thornton, each of whom failed to raise $1 million?
I am not prepared to opine on that. This is there's so much excitement kind of above and below those races that I think it's kind of got lost in the mix.
I think simply put, it looks to me like it's a battle between the Georgia Association of Educators, that's Sid Chapman, and the huge part of the Democratic primary vote that's African American. Otha Thornton is a black man. So it just seems to me it breaks down that way. You got the teachers union, you got the black voter. I don't know who prevails.
Both have definitely both of them. I don't want to overshadow this sort of thing that yes, it will be a low turnout and there's not a lot of enthusiasm. They haven't raised the money to be able to advertise, but both of these gentlemen actually have really good educational credentials. And so if you look at it, I think that it's also going to be, Sid Chapman is taking a very sort of grassroots approach. He's really trying to get around the state, but Otha Thornton is really, like you said, they're working as sort of Democratic primary voters as well. So these two gentlemen.
He's got a military background.
And he's not just relying on African American votes. I'm hearing that he's going into white liberal areas as well to really make sure that he talks to them. But I think it's going to be a razor thin finish.
But what's interesting, if you live in town as I do, there's nothing to vote for if you're pulling a Democratic ballot except this, and a judge's race, right? But neither of those two things are things that really get people excited about going to the polls. And I think one thing that if I were in either of those races, I would be really trying to figure out, how do I get these in-town voters? It's inexpensive. It's a dense pot of voters who are checking out till November and getting ready for the big fight.
And you have we haven't mentioned this a lot, but we have a big runoff election in DeKalb County for county commission. And so Greg Adams is up for re-election. Is in a runoff too. And so you're going to probably have a little bit of DeKalb vote there as well that's going to probably turn out for these gentlemen.
Right, and you also pointed out correctly judge races around the state, and I think candidates are very wise to kind of dovetail, show up at some of these events where the judges are running. Like in Fulton County, you have Fonnie Willis versus Kevin Farmer. That's a big one. In DeKalb County, we've got some, and elsewhere.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a break from politics. When we come back, we're going to talk about Phil's good scoop this week on conditions for Atlanta police. Stay with us.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Visit their website at fox5atlanta.com.
The Atlanta Police Foundation issued a heretofore confidential report that Phil dug out for Insider Advantage. And Phil, I thought the numbers were shocking. I knew there were some pay disparities, but the Atlanta police are not competitive with the new suburban cities.
No, they aren't. We were just talking during the break about the problem that the city of Atlanta has with its police department, because other law enforcement agencies in metro Atlanta are paying far higher. You've got Atlanta cops that are making in the early 40s annually, and then you've got like Sandy Springs where you could make 50 if you go over there, for example. And the shocker that we found out was that for every 100 officers that are hired, 250 leave the Atlanta Police Department.
Each year, wow.
And Dave Wilkinson, the CEO of the Atlanta Police Foundation, says we are nearing crisis levels, and especially when you have the murder rate rising in this city, it's very upsetting. And even Mayor Bottoms says that recent 3.1% raise for the police was just not enough. We got to do more.
Well, it's also interesting that Kasim Reed failed to get to that magic 2,000 officers that he talked about, that Shirley Franklin talked about before that. So we're still stuck because of this attrition. And it's a challenge. I don't know how they're going to.
Kasim Reed did nothing to hike police pay for about 8 years.
Yeah, I think we got to also remember there was a point in time where I think he did actually, he being Mayor Reed, former Mayor Reed,
he did hit 2,000.
He did actually hit 2,000. So he did achieve that goal. That was a campaign promise that he made on his first campaign, and he did meet that goal. So let's make sure we point that out. But I think the thing that what you saw from Dave Wilkinson's report, and I read it, and also if you look at the united sort of approach between Mayor Bottoms, Erica Shields, who's the chief of police, and David Wilkinson, is that you can't underscore this amendment that was introduced by Councilwoman Marcy Overstreet to really put that 3.1% increase in the budget, which is a budget we know that was passed unanimously by the council. And so while, yeah, it is a problem, they've got to figure out how to retain these officers, because they get trained in Atlanta and then they go around to suburban areas and serve us honorably. But I think that you can't underscore this proactive approach and know that that problem exists and to get that money in the budget.
And we should note, you and I know this, DeKalb has the same problem. Right. Let's change the subject to the Atlanta Follies. They're ongoing. You don't have to go to your Saturday matinee movie to see the Follies. This week, the latest chapter was that the new mayor, Keisha Lance Bottoms, spent just so far this year $11,500 on limousines as she traveled around the country, not here in Atlanta. She is even outpacing Kasim Reed's use of limousines. Whatever happened to Uber and Lyft? Kathy, I think they should sue.
Who should sue?
You don't need a limo.
Well, listen,
everybody
they
Ubers.
can't sue because, you know, for the last 3 months she's been using Ubers, and so that's one of the things that since March, when she identified this as a problem, again a proactive approach by this mayor to say, okay, we're spending too much on, and they're not. This whole thing about limousines, it's a 4-door sedan. All right, so it's not no tinted window limousine that she's riding around in cities. And so she said, look, this is too much. It's a problem. Let's scale back. So right now, this is what I want you to think.
She said it was past practice.
The mayor of Atlanta, the largest city in Georgia, when she travels now, along with her executive protection, because it's really a protection measure, actually is riding Uber. I mean, I want you guys to think about that. And so you showed me another mayor of Augusta, Savannah, that is doing what this mayor is doing. And so I think that it's really a executive protection concern too, because we know that you got to protect this mayor, and she travels with executive protection. So I think, yes, it was a little excessive. She said, okay, we can't do it anymore. But for the last now 4 months, when she travels, they take Uber.
Well,
everywhere.
I think the real question is where's she traveling to, right? You know, we are now almost in August. We don't have a fully formed cabinet. Mm-hmm. We've got a lot of vacancies at really high levels, not the least of which is the airport, and Republicans threatening to take over the airport.
Vacant. Someone is there.
Well, still, it's not permanently assigned. Mm-hmm. Had a position that was on the table this week for the new Department of Education within the city government that got taken back.
Lasted 24 hours.
Lasted 24 hours, whatever. And so really, you know, what has got to happen very, very quickly, and I'm talking in weeks, not months, is that there be a fully staffed cabinet of competent people and an agenda that people understand, because right now it's not clear what the priorities are.
Oh, well, Kathy, I think the priorities are very clear, and you know this. I mean, you have really sparked this good debate around our city, around transit, around the Beltline. The mayor is leading on that.
There's no transit
but here we
money
go.
funded for
but
the
I'm
Beltline.
about to give you. I'm about to give you 3 initiatives.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you look at what she's doing around affordability.
What is she doing?
I mean, she's basically raising money towards her $1 billion goal. She's bringing together all these different authorities. As you know, it's very siloed. You have the West Side Future Fund doing housing. You have the Atlanta Housing and doing so. But I just think that this is the thing. And let's be fair critics here. I said that taking that many limos, and she said this too, was a little too much. But we can't underscore the fact that this mayor is off to a great start, Dick and Kathy.
Oh my goodness, no.
But she does have too many holdovers from the Reid regime.
Like
and you're right about the airport, the world's busiest airport, and I think it's just stuck in neutral, especially with a federal corruption investigation.
I'm going to go a little bit differently than Kathy on this. I don't think she needs to really fill the cabinet. She needs to dump these cabinet positions. Why should she have an education officer? She did hire a chief resiliency officer. A chief resiliency officer? What is that?
That
Who
is
cares?
that's a very, and Kathy knows this.
That's
It's a very important
police.
position.
Let's give that money to the
I would
police.
target more the education officer. I don't think that's necessary. You can work all you want to with the Atlanta public school system, and there is working going on. That's a needless big government bureaucrat.
Well, the thing around the chief education officer, this young lady was submitted an offer, and the mayor has the right to rescind the offer, right? And at the end of the day, what's really startling to me is that the people that are criticizing the mayor for whatever happened with this young lady were the main people that were against her hiring this person. So I think the mayor said during the campaign that she wants to work in concert as a partner with the Atlanta Public Schools to make sure that kids in the city of Atlanta have access to a quality education.
Why did she remove this person from consideration? Was she not properly vetted in the first place?
No, I think this young lady, you know, and I don't want to tarnish her career because I think she's a very young, bright lady. I don't know her personally, but I think that she did some things that that was not appropriate.
Wasn't properly vetted.
No, she was probably, but when people
we got to get out.
do things, you had to react to it, Phil. So let's not take those cheap shots.
Let me just say for the record, Gwinnett County Commission did approve their transit plan.
Yep.
It's a big deal.
That was major.
And we don't know if it's going to be on the ballot in November or next year, but anyway, it's a major step forward for Gwinnett County. We're out of time here. When we come back, we'll anoint some winners and some losers.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
And there's so much we didn't get to in this busy, busy week because of the runoff elections. Let's try and catch up with some of it now through winners and losers. Phil?
Well, I've got a loser, and this is a Democrat state candidate, Maria Palacios, over in the Gainesville area. She is not following state law. You have to be a U.S. Citizen for 2 years at least before you can run for office. And Secretary of State Kemp found that she wasn't. Judge Craig Schwall in Fulton County ruled that she was not, so she's off the ballot. Here's a lawmaker that violates the law. I don't understand it. A couple winners. The lottery brought in another record haul for fiscal year 2017, $1.1 billion, helping a lot of kids, 1.8 million kids getting that Hope Scholarship. And I think that Britt Grant, a very prominent lawyer, judge, she's now been elevated to the Federal Court of Appeals thanks to President Trump.
Pro forma Senate passage is needed.
That's right. She went through the Judiciary Committee.
Okay. Kathy?
Winner, what's a prediction of a winner? I think Carolyn Bordeaux up against David Kim over in Congressional District 7 is going to be a winner on Tuesday. She's raised over $300,000. Kim's raised about 30, and most importantly, as Rob Woodall has only raised about 150 in aggregate over a longer period of time. 60% of the primary voters in that district are women. I think Carolyn wins on Tuesday, and I think she wins in November.
She's the Georgia State professor, right?
Yep.
Okay. Got anybody else?
Well, the Thai government. I think they did an amazing job of, they rescued those kids.
Already forgotten that deal.
Things, but also just the incredibly classy way the kids got taken care of and then reintroduced to the world. And it was just government work at its finest, I think.
All right. Darren.
I want to encourage everyone to go out this weekend to the BB&T Atlanta Open. You know, Atlanta is the top tennis town, and so you're going to have Sloane Stephens battling Madison Keys, and so it's going to be a whole week of tennis over at Atlantic Station. So definitely want to congratulate the BB&T Atlanta Open. Also, Amal Naik who was just named the Chief Resilient Officer for the City of Atlanta. So definitely want to give him a big shout out. He's a good young man. I know him personally. And also the African American Leadership Council was here this weekend. We had Tom Perez, Cory Booker, all the Democrats, Congressman Lewis, Mayor Bottoms, Michael Thurman. All the Democrats came together this weekend to really rally against the ticket. So really good weekend in Atlanta for Democrats.
All right, I'll pick up the torch with Johnny Isaacson, who on Friday afternoon honored 96-year-old Ralph Ramsey of Woodstock for his service in World War II, including being held as a prisoner by the Germans for about a year. Nice of Senator Isaacson to call him into his office and present him with a medal. I thought that was nice. And also, your Atlanta Braves, the TV ratings are up 51% year over year. We're tuning in. We're enjoying this thing. And we'll see you next week on the Georgia Gang.
The opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the panelists appearing in this program.